The Galactic Federation, a collective of sentient species, had been around for over 12,000 cycles. In all that time, we'd encountered many different species, but none quite like humans. Sure, we'd met aggressive races, like the Threxnar, with their forearms and battle-driven rage. And then there were the incredibly intelligent species, like the Volari, who could compute faster than our most advanced quantum machines. But humans? They were something else. They were utterly unpredictable. "They're completely insane," Commander Jackson Drake declared during the emergency council meeting, his facial tentacles twitching in that distinct way they always did when he was agitated. "Have you seen what they do for fun? They leap off perfectly functional ships, armed with nothing but fabric, to slow their descent. Yet somehow, they've mastered faster-than-light travel in under 3 centuries. Elder Isabella Quince, her crystalline form shimmering under the bright lights of the council chamber, countered. "Their development curve is unprecedented. They've surpassed all expectations." I watched the heated exchange from my observation post. As the chief historian of the Nixerid Collective, my role was to document, not participate. But this particular debate felt different. Our queen, our beloved Nyx era, had been captured by the Azarthi during peace talks, the most protected being in our sector, gone, vanished into the heavily fortified prison moon of Dreadstone. The council chamber erupted into a cacophony of shouting, impossible to cut through. The Azarthi's defense grid has 27 layers. No ship can approach without being disintegrated at the molecular level. We've lost 23 rescue teams already. The facts were undeniable. Dreadstone's defenses had been designed by the most paranoid species in the galaxy. Our top military minds had analyzed and reanalyzed the situation. The most advanced simulations showed 0 chance of success. Then someone, if I remember correctly, it was that strange, tentacled ambassador from Proxima B, brought up a curious human saying, "Impossible just means nobody's done it yet." That's when the truly absurd idea took root. What if we asked a human? Nyx era's prison wasn't just a simple cell. Something like that would have been manageable. No, the Azarthi had imprisoned her in what they called the Perpetuity Cube, a 6x6-meter transparent prison suspended above an artificial black hole. Not near it, not beside it, directly above it. The gravitational forces should have crushed her instantly. "Security Minister Gabriel Shaw," said the elder. "Explain." Gabriel Shaw pulled up a holographic schematic. "They've created a perfect null gravity field inside the cube," he explained. "While the outer part experiences gravitational forces so strong, they could flatten a battle cruiser." I studied the rotating display with increasing dismay. The cube hovered in the center of Dreadstone's main chamber, suspended in midair. No bridges, no tethers, just floating there, tantalizingly close but utterly unreachable. "And if someone manages to reach the cube?" Elder Isabella Quince asked, though we all knew the answer. "The defensive protocols are extensive," Gabriel Shaw replied, his voice grim. "Proximity sensors trigger a field that accelerates time within the cube. Touch the outer surface without proper authorization, and the Queen experiences 50 years in a matter of seconds." The room fell silent. Our Queen's life expectancy was 800 cycles, but subjective time, well, that was a different matter. "She's been there for 32 standard days," someone whispered. "How much has she aged already?" Gabriel Shaw's voice dropped. "The Azarthi send proof of life transmissions based on cellular degradation analysis. She's experienced approximately 3 years of subjective time." The security feed displayed a recent image of Queen Nyx era. Her normally vibrant scales had faded from royal purple to a muted lavender. Her posture was as dignified as always, but I could see the weariness in her eyes, those ancient golden eyes that had led our civilization through countless trials. "Time is against us," Gabriel Shaw concluded unnecessarily. "Each failed rescue attempt costs her years." Then, a human arrived on our capital world, carrying nothing but a worn duffel bag. Madison Clark stood at 5:05 a.m., wearing scuffed boots, dark brown skin, and a head full of tiny braids pulled back into what she called a ponytail. Her jacket was faded, adorned with mysterious patches. One of them showed an 8-legged creature, with the words "problem solver" beneath it. "So," she said, dropping her bag with a thud that made Elder Isabella Quince's crystalline form resonate, "I hear you've got an impossible situation." Commander Jackson Drake's tentacles twisted in displeasure. "This is the human expert? The one with the supposed 98% success rate on impossible extractions?" 99, Madison Clark corrected, not even glancing at him as she circled the holographic display of the Perpetuity Cube. Lost a client once when a sun went supernova unexpectedly. Technically not my fault, but I counted it anyway. I stepped forward, bowing slightly as protocol demanded when addressing a foreign specialist. Engineer Madison Clark, we appreciate your willingness to assist. Just Madison, please, she interrupted, then turned her gaze directly on me. It was unsettling. In Garlean culture, direct eye contact with a government official signified equality. Humans, it seemed, didn't share this cultural taboo. And you are? She asked. I am historian Liam Carter, appointed witness to this operation. Great, a witness, Madison said with a grin. That means when this works, someone official will get to say, I told you so. She clapped her hands together, another strange custom, and refocused on the hologram. This is one hell of a prison cell, she muttered, studying the image. Gravity, temporal acceleration, quantum lock, access codes. Someone really doesn't want your queen coming home for dinner. Security Minister Zoltak bristled. This is no joking matter. Queen Nyxera is experiencing accelerated time with every passing moment. 23 of our best rescue teams have already failed. Yes, I read the briefing. Madison waved a hand dismissively. Problem is, you're all thinking like aliens. The room went quiet. Even I, trained in diplomatic restraint, felt my scales pressed tightly against my head in offense. Excuse me? Elder Isabella Quince's crystalline voice rang with barely controlled outrage. It's not an insult, Madison replied, tapping commands into the holographic interface with an ease that was almost surprising. It's simply your limitation. You've all developed certain assumptions about how reality operates. Humans, we don't accept things as they are. We question everything, especially the rules. This is absurd, Elder Isabella Quince's crystalline form flashed with frustration. We've employed the finest minds from 17 sentient species to tackle this issue. The Zephyrox ran quantum simulations for 3 weeks nonstop. The Threxnar sent their most experienced extraction team, and none of them came back. And you think we've failed because we think like aliens? Madison barely acknowledged the comment, her focus entirely on the holographic display. Yep, exactly that. Commander Jackson Drake struck the council table with his appendage, the sharp sound echoing through the room. This human mocks us. We should never have agreed to this charade. Humans barely have stable interstellar travel, and they still use combustion engines on their home planet. Yet, Madison cut him off, finally turning her attention toward the council. We were the ones who figured out how to bypass Narathan defense grids during the Proxima B conflict. The exact same defense grid technology Dreadstone uses, if I recall correctly. The room went silent for a moment, the truth of her words sinking in. Humanity's unconventional methods had proven effective during the Proxima B conflict, but this situation was far more intricate. Security Minister Zoltak, perhaps you could explain to Engineer Madison Clark. Just Madison, she interjected. Perhaps you could explain to Madison why this problem is more complex than bypassing a simple defense grid. I suggested keeping some semblance of diplomacy intact. Zoltak's facial ridges flushed a deep shade of blue, his frustration palpable. The perpetuity cube exists in quantum flux, he began, his voice thick with tension. It's simultaneously here and not here. Any approach activates temporal acceleration. Any attempt to disrupt the gravity well risks destabilizing it completely, erasing everything within 6 astronomical units. 23 teams, human and otherwise, couldn't even get within range. Madison nodded thoughtfully. And how many of those teams were human? Zoltak hesitated, then admitted, none. Your species has yet to contribute to our special tactical forces. That's your first mistake, Madison said matter-of-factly, pulling a small red fruit from her jacket and biting into it with alarming speed. The crunch echoed loudly in the chamber, causing everyone to watch in horrified fascination. She chewed and swallowed, completely unbothered, then continued. You're all far too predictable. Elder Samuel Wells, who had been silent up until this point, leaned forward on his hover platform. His ancient scales creaked under the motion. Explain yourself, human. Madison took another bite of her fruit, speaking between chews. Every species has a pattern for solving problems. The Valari are all about math. The Threxnar meet obstacles with overwhelming force. You Nyxerid, she gestured toward me with the half-eaten fruit. You catalog every solution ever attempted and try to improve on them, step by step. And humans? I found myself genuinely curious despite myself. Madison flashed a wide grin, showing those unnervingly flat teeth. We throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. Spaghetti? Elder Isabella Quince's translation crystal blinked in confusion. It's a metaphor, Madison said, giving a casual shrug. It means we try random, sometimes completely illogical approaches until something works. And sometimes we succeed precisely because we don't know why we shouldn't be able to. Commander Jackson Drake's tentacles twisted into what our species recognized as an extreme expression of doubt. And this spaghetti approach is supposed to save our queen, after all our logical efforts have failed. Exactly, Madison said, tossing the core of her fruit into the ceremonial urn. Definitely not a waste receptacle. Logic has failed us utterly, she continued. It's time to try something completely illogical. Before Madison's arrival, the planning chamber had been an immaculate display of order. Holographic projections arranged by priority, data streams neatly categorized, and simulation results color-coded for clarity. After 6 hours with the human, all of that had changed. What is that substance on the tactical interface? Security Minister Zoltak asked, his voice higher than usual. Coffee, Madison replied nonchalantly, her attention still fixed on the scattered papers. Real, actual paper, now covering every surface of the room. I think better with coffee. You've disabled the quantum prediction matrix, Elder Isabella Quince observed, her crystalline form dimming slightly as if in distress. The system was designed to provide predictions based on established laws of physics. Too constraining, Madison muttered, scribbling furiously on her papers. Kept spitting out results based on known physics. Useless. I couldn't help but watch in fascination. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, and most of what we'd learned about them came from formal diplomacy. This was something entirely different. Madison hummed absently, occasionally muttering to herself, and frequently using a term she called cursing whenever a calculation didn't go her way. The approach vectors you're calculating, Commander Jackson Drake said, peering over her shoulder. They violate at least 3 fundamental laws of spatial navigation. Good, Madison replied, adding yet another line to her increasingly disorganized diagram. Laws are made to be broken. They're not legal codes, Jackson Drake sputtered. They're the fundamental properties of reality. Madison met his gaze and smiled. You'd be surprised how negotiable those can be. She turned back to her work, leaving Jackson Drake speechless. An unprecedented occurrence in my memory. Here's the problem, Madison announced suddenly, standing up and stretching in a way that made her spine crack loudly. Everyone's been trying to reach the cube directly. Wrong approach. She tapped a command, and the holographic display shifted to reveal the power systems of Dreadstone. The perpetuity cube needs immense energy to stay active. That energy has to come from somewhere. Instead of trying to reach the cube, we're going to manipulate its power source. She pointed to a specific node on the schematic. This node here regulates the power distribution for the entire facility, including the temporal field generators. Zoltak raised an eyebrow, skepticism written all over his face. That node is buried under 3 miles of magnetically sealed trianium. I know, Madison cut him off, and that's exactly what we want. I blinked in confusion. You want to trigger the security systems? Her smile grew predatory. Exactly, because they've designed their systems to counter every known approach, but they've never had to counter a human. This is madness, muttered Commander Jackson Drake as our stealth vessel neared the outer defense perimeter of Dreadstone, his tentacles twisted nervously. The command console. Never in the history of the Federation has anyone tried such a reckless plan, Zoltak muttered, his voice heavy with disbelief. Madison strapped herself into a seat clearly not designed for human anatomy and flashed a grin. That's exactly why it'll work. They're expecting methodical. What we're giving them is chaos. If one could even call it a plan, it involved approaching Dreadstone during a scheduled supply delivery. Our ship was transmitting falsified credentials, cobbled together by Madison from fragments of previously authorized vessel data, a method she referred to as digital scrapbooking. Approaching final checkpoint, announced our pilot Telix, a Korovi whose mathematical precision had initially clashed with Madison's freewheeling approach. Now they worked together in an odd but strangely harmonious way. Telix calculated optimal trajectories, while Madison deliberately introduced tiny errors to make our approach seem more organic. Remember, Madison said, checking her bizarre contraption one final time, once we're in the loading bay, we've got exactly 7 minutes before the verification protocol cycle resets. The diversion needs to be spectacular enough to pull all attention away from the maintenance tunnels. You're certain this device will be enough to cause the distraction? I asked, eyeing the collection of components she had assembled from our ship's spare parts and her own mysterious supplies. "Oh, it'll be more than enough," she said with that unsettling smile, the one where teeth were on display but not in a threatening way. "Just make sure you're wearing the protective gear I gave you, especially the ear coverings." The initial entry went surprisingly smoothly. Our counterfeit credentials passed through the automated scanners, and the loading bay doors opened to admit us. Telex executed a perfect landing among other supply vessels. "Phase 1 complete," Madison whispered unnecessarily. "Moving on to Phase 2. She activated her device, a crude-looking assembly that started emitting a soft, pulsing glow. Then, without a word, she left it sitting on the loading dock and hurried back to our position in the maintenance access corridor. "That's it?" Security Minister Gabriel Shaw asked, sounding skeptical. "Wait for it," Madison said, glancing at the chronometer on her wrist. 3, 2, 1. Nothing happened. Madison's frown deepened. "That's not right." "Your distraction device has failed," Commander Jackson Drake said, his tentacles writhing with "I told you so" energy. "The entire mission is compromised." "Give it a second," Madison insisted. "Sometimes the chemical reaction takes a little longer." Then the explosion hit. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just sound and light, but a concussive force that seemed to ripple through reality itself. Even with the protective gear, my senses overloaded for a brief moment. When I regained my bearings, alarm klaxons were blaring throughout the facility. "Perfect," Madison shouted over the noise. "Now we—" She never finished the sentence. The floor beneath us suddenly became transparent, then liquid, like a vast, shimmering purple field that materialized out of nowhere. We didn't fall. We were pulled into it like something was pulling us through a portal. "Quantum trap," Gabriel Shaw managed to yell before we were all immobilized. The last thing I remember was Madison's face. She wasn't frightened or even surprised. She looked intrigued, as if this complete failure was just an unexpected development in an otherwise interesting experiment. Guards surrounded us in an instant. The Azarthii soldiers, 8-limbed and armed with phase rifles, their mirrored faceplates reflecting the dim lighting. Their commander approached Madison directly. "Human," it said in the clicking, rasping voice typical of their species. "Unexpected. Fascinating. The architects will want to study you personally." "Looking forward to meeting them," Madison replied casually, as though she'd been invited to dinner rather than captured during an illegal infiltration. "Quick question, though. Was it the power signature that gave us away, or the false credentials?" "Neither," the commander answered coldly. "We detected your approach 20 minutes before you reached the perimeter." "Ha," Madison said thoughtfully. "Good to know." The cell they placed us in wasn't just a holding area. It was an observation chamber. One side of it was transparent, our side, and presumably monitored from the other. It was a typical interrogation setup, except for one key detail. We had a perfect view of the perpetuity cube. "That's deliberate," Zoltak muttered, his scales flattening against his skull in defeat. "They want us to witness our queen's suffering." But Madison wasn't looking at the queen. She was focused on the space surrounding the cube, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "Something's off," she whispered. "The gravitational distortion doesn't match the projections." I followed her gaze, struggling to understand what she was seeing. The perpetuity cube hung there, just as the holograms had shown, suspended over the artificial black hole, with Queen Nyx's era visible inside, her scales now noticeably duller. "What do you mean?" I asked, but Madison was already explaining. "The light bending around it." She traced patterns in the air with her finger. "It's consistent with a gravity well, but not with the type of black hole they described. The curvature is too uniform." Commander Jackson Drake joined us at the transparent wall. "Explain, human." "It's not a black hole," Madison said, her voice dropping lower, as though she didn't want the guards to overhear. "It's a projection, a very sophisticated one, but still just smoke and mirrors." "Impossible," Zoltak said, his voice rising in disbelief. "Our sensors confirm the gravitational readings." "Sensor readings can be falsified," Madison countered smoothly. "But light behaves according to actual physics, not programmed responses." A slow realization dawned on me. If there's no black hole, I started, but Madison finished the thought. Then the cube isn't suspended over certain death, it's just suspended. "But the temporal field," Jackson Drake began. "Oh, that's real enough," Madison interrupted. "I can see the distortion wave patterns, but it's not tied to proximity triggers like they led you to believe. It's manually controlled." She turned to face us, that strange, unsettling grin spreading across her face. They've been lying about the security systems, about all of it. The Azarthii isn't protecting against rescue attempts. They're studying them. Every failed attempt teaches them more about how different species think, plan, and react. "This isn't just a prison," she said, her voice low. "It's a laboratory, and we've all been test subjects." The guards returned 6 hours later, separating us. I was escorted to an interrogation room, minimalist and stark, designed to induce discomfort through sheer simplicity. After enduring 2 hours of intense questioning about Federation security protocols, I was returned to our cell. Commander Jackson Drake and Security Minister Zol Tak were already there, looking shaken. The only one missing was Madison. "They're going to execute her," Jackson Drake said, his voice grim and heavy. "The human knows too much," Zol Tak muttered. "Maybe that was her plan all along." "Humans are known for their self-sacrificial tendencies," he suggested thoughtfully. 3 more hours crawled by before the door slid open. Madison walked in, looking remarkably calm for someone who'd presumably been interrogated by the galaxy's most notorious regime. "What happened?" I asked, unable to hold back my curiosity. "We thought they'd try to torture me for information," Madison said, laughing and casually dropping onto the bench next to me. "They tried, but their pain inducers weren't calibrated for human neurophysiology. All I felt was a mild tingling, quite pleasant actually." Leaning forward, she lowered her voice conspiratorially. "More importantly, I got what we needed. The control room for the temporal field is 2 levels down, Section 47B. And I know exactly how to get us there." "How could you possibly know that?" Zol Tak demanded, his tone suspicious. Madison tapped her temple, a smirk playing on her lips. "They showed me. Tried to intimidate me with a little tour of their security measures. Classic villain mistake." "But even if we manage to reach the controls," Jackson Drake argued, "the moment we touch them—" "We won't need to," Madison interrupted, her grin widening. "We're not going to deactivate the temporal field. We're going to reverse it." She pulled a small device from her boot, one I hadn't noticed before. "What's that?" I asked. "Emerald oscillator," she said casually. "Swiped it from one of their labs during my tour. They use it to calibrate the field." "You plan to recalibrate their field without them noticing?" I asked, still stunned. Madison's smile became downright mischievous. "No, I'm planning on causing the biggest, most catastrophic malfunction in the history of temporal physics." She then reached into her other pocket and pulled out another device, a small cylindrical object with a blinking red light. "This will scramble their surveillance systems for exactly 47 seconds. Just enough time to explain the real plan, the one they won't see coming." She activated the device. A soft pulse rippled through the air. "Listen carefully," Madison said, her voice turning serious, her playful demeanor vanishing. "The temporal field doesn't just accelerate time, it manipulates it. With this oscillator, we can create a recursive loop. When we trigger it, this entire section will experience multiple timelines at once." "That's theoretically impossible," Zol Tak said, his mind clearly struggling to grasp the concept. "Impossible for you, maybe," Madison said, her voice sharp. "Humans have been creating temporal paradoxes accidentally since we discovered fire." She was speaking rapidly now, almost too fast to follow. "When the loop starts, we'll each experience slightly different versions of reality. The guards will still see us locked in this cell, while we'll see a path leading to the control room. The Queen will experience a brief reversion to normal time, just long enough to understand what's happening." "And then," Jackson Drake pressed. "Then it gets interesting," Madison said, her voice brimming with excitement. "Surveillance down in 3, 2, 1. The lights flickered, alarms blared, and the door to our cell opened, closed, and opened again, as though reality itself was in conflict over which state was correct. "Move!" Madison shouted, charging into the corridor. We followed, though every fiber of my historian's training screamed at the violations of causality we were committing. The corridor ahead was wrong. Sometimes it stretched long and narrow, other times it shrank and widened. Guards appeared and disappeared like ghosts, walking past us as though they couldn't see us at all. "They're experiencing a different timeline branch," Madison explained as we ran. "In their reality, we're still in the cell. In ours, we're escaping. Both are true until the recursion collapses." "This defies all known laws of physics," Zol Tak protested, but his pace didn't falter. "Welcome to human problem solving," Madison called back cheerfully. Sometimes we just break the laws and hope reality doesn't notice. We reached a junction that shifted between three configurations. Madison didn't hesitate. She took the middle path, which, from my perspective, seemed to lead straight into a solid wall. I followed her blindly, surprised when the wall simply wasn't there when I reached it. Temporal phase shift, Madison explained, noticing my confusion. Different objects experiencing different moments in time. When we reached the control room, it was both occupied and unoccupied. Technicians moved around as translucent figures, their forms flickering like echoes in a timeline adjacent to ours. Perfect, Madison muttered, approaching the main console. Now for the really impossible part. She connected her stolen oscillator to the temporal controls, then pulled yet another device from her seemingly endless pockets. "What is that?" I asked, not sure if I should even bother questioning anything at this point. "Technically a ham sandwich," Madison replied with a grin, clearly enjoying my confusion, "but I've modified it with nanites that interface with the oscillator. The organic matter creates a quantum uncertainty that the system can't resolve." "You're using food as a technology interface?" Commander Jackson Drake's tentacles wriggled in disbelief. "It's not the sandwich itself," Madison said with a wink. "It's what the system thinks the sandwich is." Her fingers moved rapidly over the controls. To the Azarthai's quantum computers, this is simultaneously food, a weapon, a communication device, and a dimensional anchor. The system will try to classify it and fail. Before I could process what she was saying, a deafening crack rang out. The air around us seemed to splinter. Through the cracks, I glimpsed other versions of ourselves. Some running, some fighting, some already fallen. "That wasn't supposed to happen," Madison admitted, her confident expression faltering for the first time. "The temporal recursion is collapsing too quickly. We have maybe 30 seconds before realities merge." I asked desperately. "Working on it," Madison shouted, her hands moving in a blur across the console as it began to flicker in and out of existence beneath her fingertips. "But we've got company," she said, her voice suddenly sharp, as she glanced toward the door. "Company that definitely sees us now." The control room door crashed open, and Azarthai guards flooded in, not the translucent phantasmal figures from before, but solid, very tangible soldiers, all with heavy weapons trained on us. "Keep them busy!" Madison shouted over the growing chaos, her focus never wavering as she continued to work furiously at the console. Commander Jackson Drake moved with surprising agility for someone with tentacles, toppling equipment to form a makeshift barricade. Zal Tak, ever the strategist, produced a concealed weapon from his uniform. Apparently, security ministers weren't entirely defenseless, even on diplomatic missions. As for me, I was a historian. Combat was not in my skill set. I positioned myself beside Madison. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice edged with urgency. "See that readout?" she pointed, her fingers still flying across the console. "When it hits red, press the sequence I've entered. Not before, not after, exactly when it turns red." Phase rifles fired, sending sizzling energy bolts whizzing past us. One shot struck the wall behind Madison, showering her with sparks. Not a single flinch. She didn't even look up. "Almost there," she muttered, her voice calm despite the chaos. "The temporal field's destabilizing. If I can reverse the polarity before the system compensates." The console erupted into a series of flashing warnings. Madison laughed of all things in the middle of the firefight. "They're trying to lock me out," she said gleefully, her fingers still tapping away at the interface. "But they designed their security systems for calculated, methodical intrusions. Not for someone just smashing buttons and hoping it works." "That's your strategy?" I asked, disbelief in my voice. "Partially," Madison grinned. "I'm also exploiting a glitch in their verification protocol. They never expected anyone to manipulate the quantum state of a ham sandwich while trying to hack their temporal controls." "Is this how humans always solve problems?" I asked, still struggling to keep up. "Only the fun ones," she replied, before returning to the console. Her voice became more urgent. "Readout. Watch the readout." The display she pointed to was fluctuating wildly now, cycling through different colors as the timeline warped around us. I fixed my eyes on it, trying to ignore the growing chaos behind us. Commander Jackson Drake let out a pained cry, but I couldn't take my eyes off the readout. Yellow, orange, red. I pressed the sequence. The whole facility trembled. The lights blinked out, only to flicker back on, brighter than before. The air shimmered with waves of distortion. Then, silence. Complete, utter silence. I turned to see the Azarthi guards frozen in place, no longer just paused, but seemingly turned to statues in mid-motion. Temporal stasis, Madison said, breathing heavily. Won't last long. Let's go. She grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the door. Zoltak helped Jackson Drake, who was clearly wounded but still able to move, follow us. We raced down corridors filled with frozen guards and technicians, all caught in the temporal stasis. But the Queen, I protested, my thoughts still racing. Taking care of it, Madison replied, her voice sharp. The temporal reversal didn't just stop time. It reversed it inside the perpetuity cube. As far as the universe is concerned, Queen Nyx's era was never imprisoned there. Then where is she? I asked, my mind scrambling to process the implications. If my calculations are correct, Madison said, her tone light but confident, and they usually are, give or take a catastrophic explosion, she's already back on your capital world. Probably wondering why everyone's making such a fuss. We reached the docking bay. Our ship was waiting. Engines already running. The temporal distortion must have affected more than I realized. How can we be sure? Zoltak demanded, his voice tense as we boarded. How can we know the Queen is really safe? Madison pulled up a communication screen. The face that appeared wasn't the tired, worn version of Queen Nyx's era we'd seen in the cube. No, this was the monarch. Radiant, her royal purple scales gleaming with health. Because, Madison said, that insufferable grin still plastered on her face, I set the temporal coordinates myself. The journey back to Federation space passed in stunned silence. Our mission, deemed impossible by the greatest minds of 17 species, had succeeded, all thanks to one human's refusal to accept limitations. 2 standard weeks later, I stood before the High Council, delivering my official historian's report. Queen Nyx's era herself presided, fully recovered, showing no signs of the temporal acceleration she'd endured. The chamber was packed with representatives from every Federation world, and the tension was palpable. I concluded my testimony. Engineer Madison Clark accomplished in 6 days what our combined forces could not achieve in 32, I said firmly. The Azarthi's supposedly impenetrable prison was breached, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through unpredictability. Elder Isabella Quince's crystalline form flashed with a light of skepticism. You suggest we should value chaos over order? Illogic over reason? This hardly seems a sustainable strategy for the Federation. Madison, seated in the witness position, snorted loudly, a human gesture of derision I had come to recognize. Permission to address the council? She asked, raising her hand when Queen Nyx's era gave her a nod of approval. Madison stood, her voice calm and collected. I don't suggest replacing logic with chaos, she said, her words firm. I suggest supplementing it. Every species in this room evolved to solve problems in a specific way. That's your strength and your weakness. Humans, she grinned. We're adaptable to a fault. We try everything, even approaches that make no sense, including weaponizing food items. Commander Jackson Drake added dryly, especially weaponizing food items. Madison smiled. The point is, we see possibilities where you see impossibilities, precisely because we don't know any better. Queen Nyx's era raised her scepter, her golden eyes locking onto Madison, and the room fell silent. The Federation has existed for 12,000 cycles, she began, her voice booming across the chamber. In all that time, we have encountered countless species, but none quite like humans. You are chaotic, unpredictable, and frequently nonsensical. She paused, and I feared for a moment that this might turn into an international incident. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Queen Nyx's era's scales rippled with what could only be described as laughter. Clearly, she continued, her voice full of mirth, that is exactly what this stagnant galactic community needs. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of voices, some outraged, some intrigued, but all deeply affected. I looked at Madison, who seemed completely unfazed by the pandemonium she had created. Is it always like this with humans? I asked quietly. Pretty much, she replied, casually biting into another one of those strange red fruits she always seemed to have on hand. It's destabilizing a prison with a sandwich today. Tomorrow it might be redefining your entire understanding of physics. We're irritating that way. As the argument swirled around us, I found myself wondering, just maybe, a little human chaos was exactly what the galaxy needed after all.